Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 751, and today is January 29th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We have a lot of news to get through on today's show. Israel, of course, invading neighbors and killing ceasefires will be the primary topic, but also some news on Ukraine and some updates on some of Trump's more interesting statements over the past few days. So if you like this show, share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Additionally, follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_ for all my work, articles I write, the daily email from the Libertarian Institute that I put out, and of course all the shows I do, and that includes not only Conflicts of Interest, but the all-new Kyle Anzalone show. And if you haven't already, head on over and subscribe to that channel. We will be putting out another episode. We'll air it live later today, so you'll definitely want to be subscribed to that channel so you don't miss that show. All right, with that, let's get into the news for today. Ukrainian military chief Intel chief warns of threat to Ukraine's existence if negotiations with Russia don't start. So the head of Ukraine's military intelligence has warned that if negotiations to end the war with Russia don't begin by this summer, Ukraine's very existence will be threatened. According to a report from Yuska Pravda, the head of the Ukrainian military intelligence issued the warning during a closed-door meeting of Ukraine's parliament. A source who attended the meeting told the media outlet that the official was asked how much time Ukraine has, and he replied, if there's no serious negotiations by the summer, dangerous processes could unfold, threatening Ukraine's very existence. So, describing the response to the remarks, the source said, everyone exchanged uneasy glances and fell silent. It felt like everything depends on things going right. So the remarks come as the new Trump administration has declared that its official policy is to seek the end of the war in Ukraine, but so far there have been no signs that negotiations have started. In the meantime, Ukrainian President Zelensky has been floating ideas for potential peace that would be non-starter for talks with Moscow, including a proposal for 200,000 Western troops to be deployed to Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire. Not only is that probably a non-starter for Russia, that might be even a non-starter for Ukraine's allies, who might not be too interested in deploying 200,000 of their soldiers to the Russian border. All right, next up here. Russia says it hasn't received requests for Putin-Trump talks. So the Kremlin on Monday said that Russia is ready for contact between Putin and Trump, but hasn't received any requests for such talks from the new administration. The Kremlin spokesperson said, we haven't received any signals from the Americans yet. This is why we are continuing working to schedule maintaining readiness for dialogue. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov made similar comments, saying the only contact between the U.S. and Russia is being carried out at the embassy level. He explained, as the Russian president has repeatedly said, we are open to dialogue and contacts, and conversations and meetings. On the campaign trail, Trump pledged to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, but fighting continues to rage across the front lines. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that Trump has given his envoy, Keith Kellogg, 100 days to reach a deal. Trump recently criticized Zelensky, saying he decided to fight Russia instead of making a deal. The comments signaled that the Trump administration might be willing to put pressure on Zelensky to get him to negotiate with Russia, but it's unclear what sort of deal Washington will be willing to offer Moscow. The State Department has paused foreign aid for 90 days, with exceptions for Israel and Egypt. But these frozen funds do not appear to impact U.S. weapons shipments to Ukraine that go through the Pentagon. And this is what I had initially thought when I read that report. I think only like 300 million. It might be a little bit more this coming year, but in the past years, it's only been 300 million. A very small chunk of the Ukrainian aid actually came through the foreign military financing program that is Pentagon distributed funds. And so those would maybe be held up or frozen, but there is I think another 3.5 billion that the Trump administration has access to in presidential drawdown authority funds, as well as the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. And those funds, again, are for the Pentagon to buy weapons for Ukraine. And so I don't see any moves here to curtail the weapon shipments. Now, I want to add here that it that I see two major challenges for Trump in trying to end this war. One is that there's going to be a lot of political pressure in the United States not to end it, and Trump is going to have to deal with Congress. Russia, one of their core demands, does appear at least some level of sanctions relief from Ukraine's Western backers upon agreement of a deal, and those sanctions will have to be voted on. The removal of those sanctions will have to be voted on and approved by Congress, something that Trump may struggle with. Now, additionally, in 2022, there was a pretty good deal offered to Ukraine. Some demilitarization, they agreed never to join NATO, a process of denazification of the Ukrainian government, and then Russia was willing to withdraw from all Ukrainian territory minus the Crimean Peninsula, which Moscow had annexed back in 2014. So now Russian forces have taken the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as two southern oblasts, Zaporizhia and Kherson. And those will never be given back to Ukraine at this point. And so one of the struggles I think Trump is going to have is that Ukraine is in a significantly worse off position now than they were in 2022 when that deal was offered. And so Trump is going to have to take a worse deal than was on the table at one point. And I think that's going to be hard for Trump, with his ultimate deal maker persona, and that, he's going to receive a lot of criticism for not getting a good deal that was on the table in 2022. All right, moving up here, Ukrainian media outlets asking for donations after U.S. funding is paused. So in one way, it does seem that Ukraine was hit by that order, wasn't necessarily military aid, but was some of the other funding going to Ukraine. And so this went through USAID. Major Ukrainian media outlets are asking for donations following the Trump administration's 90-day foreign aid pause, since many of them are funded by the U.S. government. A Ukrainian-Canadian professor and researcher noted on X that Ukrainian online newspaper Strana.ua reported that two outlets, I'm not going to try to pronounce them because I can't, acknowledged that their fundraising pitches are because the U.S. lost funding. So in one of the outlets said in a Facebook post that a large portion of its work had been funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. The post said, therefore, now the role of donations from viewers is changing from an alternative source to one of the key ones. What will happen in 90 days, we do not know, but we know one thing: now is the time to find out whether our work is really needed by Ukrainian society. The second outlet said some of its projects that we implement thanks to grants are temporarily stopped. This is why we especially need your support, each and every one of you. Other Ukrainian outlets, including Uskrata Pravda, also began asking for donations following the pause on U.S. foreign aid, but did not explicitly name that as the reason that they were asking for fundraising. So I think this is very interesting, in part because if USAID, if all these Ukrainian outlets were only able to continue to operate because of the money coming by the U.S., well, how much did that skew their reporting, and how much has that been used as a tool to propagandize the Ukrainian people? It's important to remember that, USAID is often thought of as like a public branch of the CIA. And so if USAID is spending all this money funding all these outlets, well, they obviously have a reason. I'm sure they're only funding outlets that are very pro-Kiev and anti-Moscow. And again, this is a part of the whole propaganda campaign in the war that Washington is waging in Ukraine. Next up here, Trump wants to pull 20,000 U.S. troops out of Europe. So President Trump wants to withdraw about 20,000 U.S. troops from Europe. The Italian news agency ANSA reported last week. The U.S. currently has about 100,000 troops deployed across Europe, a result of the Biden administration beefing up the U.S. presence on the continent, which began around the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Biden brought the number of troops to its highest level since 2005. The report, which cited a European diplomat, said Trump wants to reduce military presence in Europe by 20% and would like European countries hosting U.S. troops to pay more for their presence. So, according to Newsweek, the diplomat said, furthermore, for those who remain, he would like financial contribution from European countries because these soldiers are not a deterrent. The cost cannot be borne by the American taxpayers. So during his previous term in office, Trump planned to pull 9,500 troops out of Germany as a part of his efforts to pressure the U.S. European allies to pay more for their militaries. But that withdrawal was never carried out, and the plan was reversed by the Biden administration. Before his inauguration, Trump suggested that NATO countries should increase military spending to 5% of their GDP, which is significantly higher than the alliance's current 2% goal, which many members don't already meet. And I think the 5% goal is actually pretty substantially ahead of where the U.S. is currently at defense spending level. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for the Institute on January 28th. U.S. transferred Patriot missiles from Israel to Ukraine. So the U.S. has moved some of its Patriot missiles from Israel to Ukraine. The interceptors were in storage in Tel Aviv after Israel decommissioned its Patriot air defense program. The transfer is the most significant Israeli support for Ukraine since the Russian invasion in 2022. Axios reported around 90 Patriot interceptors were moved from Israel to Poland this week. The missiles will then be moved into Ukraine. President Zelensky has demanded world leaders provide Ukraine with more interceptors as Kiev attempts to protect its cities from Russian attacks. In recent months, Kiev and Moscow have escalated missile and drone attacks on each other's cities and critical infrastructure. The Israeli Defense Forces recently stopped using the Patriot system for air defense. Washington has provided billions in military aid to Tel Aviv so Israel could develop domestically produced air defense systems. Even after Tel Aviv decommissioned the Patriot program, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was reluctant to sign off on sending the interceptors to Ukraine. Netanyahu's refused Zelensky's calls for several months before finally agreeing to the transfer in September. According to Axios, Tel Aviv was concerned that Moscow could respond by sending more advanced weapons to Iran. Throughout the war in Ukraine, Moscow and Tehran have developed significant military ties, with Iran sending drones to Russia. Earlier this month, Moscow and Tehran signed a defense agreement. Tel Aviv is attempting to downplay the transfer. An Israeli official claimed that Tel Aviv is not sending the Patriots to Ukraine, but transferred the interceptors back to U.S. control. A second official said Tel Aviv was unaware whether the system was delivered to Ukraine at all. And so they're really trying to say, we gave this to the Americans and the Americans are going to do what they want to do. My guess is that Netanyahu probably saw some advantage in appeasing Washington by doing this. Your major project is this war in Ukraine, and so now Israel is officially a contributor to that program, to that proxy war, to that project. So in recent weeks, Ukraine and Israel engaged in multiple high-level discussions, including Zelensky's meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Ukrainian embassy in Israel reported that Tel Aviv was considering sending Russian-made weapons seized in southern Lebanon to Ukraine. The Telegraph noted that some war observers believe those weapons began arriving in Ukraine earlier this week, which is about the same time the Patriots began arriving in Poland. All right, next up here, another article I wrote for the Institute, this one on January 27th. Hamas recruited 15,000 new fighters since Israel's invasion of Gaza. So one of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top goals for Israel's onslaught in Gaza is to eliminate Hamas. The U.S. intelligence community now says Tel Aviv may not have made any progress in achieving that goal, as Hamas has added 15,000 new fighters since the Israeli Defense Forces began military operations in the Strip. According to congressional sources who were briefed on the situation by the intelligence community, Hamas recruited between 10 and 15,000 new fighters in the past 15 months. During that same period, the intelligence community believes Israel killed about the same number of Hamas fighters. This revelation shows that Hamas's losses are lower than the number reported by Israel. Tel Aviv has claimed to kill over 20,000 militants. The U.S. estimate is also lower than the number of children who have been confirmed killed during the Israeli onslaught in Gaza, approximately 17,000. And we do know that that number is an undercount by about 41%. And so I guess that would put the actual figure at about 25,000 children killed from violent deaths in Gaza. And if you figure they're estimating 10 to 15,000 Hamas fighters killed, 12,500, would be right in the middle, which would be about half the number of children killed in this conflict. And so for every Hamas fighter killed, they're killing 2 Palestinian children. I mean, that is an absolutely insane and disgusting ratio. And to pretend that this is the most moral army on earth, as we constantly hear American officials and politicians tell us, American media tell us that Israel is trying so hard not to kill these poor Palestinian children. They just want to take out Hamas so the Israeli children will be safe. This is what we're told time and time again, but this is not the reality whatsoever. Israel is slaughtering people, families at entire times, entire families killed. And this, could include 5, 6, a dozen children, right? If, it's an extended family household. And so, a lot of this, a lot of the adults killed certainly aren't members of Hamas. And, to only count the children and say these are the innocent civilians isn't necessarily right. But to look at the number of children killed in this conflict and realize it's so much higher than the number of militants killed just goes to show that not only is Israel not the most moral army on earth, it may be the most immoral army on earth. So, former Secretary of State Antony Blinken made similar statements before the end of Biden's presidency. He said the U.S. assessed that Hamas recruited almost as many new militants as it had lost, and adding that is a recipe for an enduring insurgency and a perpetual war. So the Israeli UN ambassador, that's Danny Danon, attempted to downplay the American assessment. He said, "We know Hamas recruits youngsters, but even if they recruit youngsters, they don't have the weapons or the training facilities. So basically, you can incite those youngsters against Israel, but they cannot become a terrorist because you cannot equip them with weapons or rockets." And so it's really interesting. He's calling them youngsters, which, of course, if they were killed on the battlefield, I'm sure Israel wouldn't be saying, "Oh, we're killing children." They would be saying, "We're killing Hamas militants and, just we're killing terrorists," right? And so it's an interesting discrepancy there. But at the same time, I think this is really important. Last January, the IDF concluded that a significant number, I think up to 60%, 60 to 80% of Hamas's weapons are made from unexploded Israeli bombs dropped on Gaza. As Tel Aviv had pummeled the strip with a historic number of munitions, Hamas may find ample material to rearm. Additionally, when you have seen Hamas fighters since the start of the ceasefire, they appear well armed, they appear disciplined, they are all dressed in uniform, and so I don't think this necessarily suggests a army of youngsters that are barely equipped or armed. That's not what we're seeing. So Blinken went on to say the White House's determination that Israel would be determined that Israel would be unable to eliminate Hamas, explaining, "We've long made the point to the Israeli government that Hamas cannot be defeated by a military campaign alone, that without a clear alternative, a post-conflict plan, and a credible political horizon for Palestinians, Hamas, or something just as abhorrent and dangerous, will grow back." Now, I want to make another point here, is that Blinken recognized this and then gave Israel every bomb, every warplane, every missile, every tank shell, every artillery shell, every gun that they wanted. Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense why you would be absolutely subservient to a policy that you know, that you're identifying, that you're telling the American people cannot be achieved. It's just, the failures of the Biden administration will definitely be historic in this country. I mean, just what they did on the foreign policy stage was absolutely disgusting and destructive, not only for the United States, but for the entire world. And I really imagine that, just like the Cheney-Bush administration, it will be remembered just for an absolute pile of corpses and just disgusting behavior on the world stage. So finishing up the article here, the fact that Israel was making no progress towards its objectives of defeating Hamas while killing a massive number of civilians did not cause the Biden administration to alter policy and hard arms transfers to Israel. After a ceasefire began on the final day of the Biden presidency, Hamas showed that it maintained significant capabilities, as well as establishing security control. The group was able to begin returning some services in the decimated enclave. All right, next up here, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians begin returning to northern Gaza. So this one dated to camp January 27th, antiwar.com. Palestinians who were displaced from northern Gaza in the early days of Israel's genocidal war on the Strip began returning to the ruins of their homes on Monday as a part of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Despite the massive destruction in northern Gaza, the health ministry estimates around 650,000 Palestinians will return. Later in the day, Gaza's media office said 300,000 Palestinians had returned on Monday. The Israeli military first ordered the evacuation of northern Gaza in October of 2023, when it was estimated that the area was home to about 1.1 million people. Most Palestinians were forced from the north, have been displaced multiple times over the past 15 months, and have been living in tent camps in southern and central Gaza. So, many returning to the north will go on living in tents near the rubble of their homes. A North Gaza resident who returned to find his home in ruins told Middle East Eye, "We have spent around 1 year and 3 months resilient in the Gaza Strip. We did not eat anything from the world. We only had God with us." Some Palestinians said the return north was a message to President Trump, who recently suggested the idea of cleaning out Gaza of its Palestinian residents and sending them to Egypt or Jordan, an idea strongly rejected by neighboring Arab states. So one Gaza resident told the New Arab, "Proposals like Trump ignore the deep ties and sacrifices that bind people to their homes. These are not just houses, they are a symbol of identity and resistance." Palestinians were able to return north as a part of a deal brokered by Qatar that will see the release of Israeli female civilian hostages and 2 other captives on Thursday. Hamas said the return north was a victory for Palestinians and a setback for Israel. Starting in October of 2024 and in the months leading up to the ceasefire, the Israeli military has significantly escalated in northern Gaza. Palestinian civilians were forced to leave their homes under threat of death, whether by military action or starvation. IDF soldiers also demolished nearly every building in the cities, so Palestinians had nowhere to return. Many Israeli officials and settlers hoped that the campaign in North Gaza would lead to ethnic cleansing and the establishment of Jewish settlements, and the return of Palestinians marks a major blow to their plans. Gloria Eland, a retired IDF general who devised the ethnic cleansing plan for northern Gaza, which became known as the General's Plan, said allowing Palestinians to return to the territory was a failure of Israel's war goals. He said Israel was now at the mercy of Hamas. And so, in a way, I do think this is a victory for the Palestinians. I think it allows them to show that they will never abandon Gaza and that they do plan on staying there. I think the other part of this is with all the infrastructure destroyed, all the hospitals gone, Israel, set fire to the last hospital in northern Gaza, with all the bakeries destroyed and everything like this. If Israel doesn't allow a significant amount of aid in, these people are going to be very, very, very vulnerable. And so that's just an important piece of all of this to remember, because, we do have some members of the Israeli government who are really salivating over Trump's plan to clear out Palestinians from Gaza. And if they see all they have to do is not allow food, medicine, and other aid into the strip, then they might take that action to make it possible. So this is Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and he said he's working to make Trump's suggestion that Palestinians could be cleaned out of Gaza and moved to Egypt or Jordan a reality. Trump's idea sparked backlash from Arab nations, including Egypt and Jordan, who said they strongly oppose the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Smotrich downplayed their response, calling it weak opposition. Speaking to reporters ahead of the meeting with his religious Zionism party, Smotrich told reporters that he is working with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on an operational plan to implement Trump's proposal. He said, I am working with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to prepare an operational plan to ensure the realization of President Trump's vision. There is nothing to be excited about this week. Opposition from Egypt and Jordan to the plan. We saw yesterday how Trump imposed his will on Colombia to deport migrants, and the opposition, when he says he wants it, it happens. And so what happened there was Colombia rejected some migrant flights, and Trump basically said, I will drop an economic nuclear bomb on your country, and then Colombia complied. And so they're saying basically something very similar could happen with Egypt and Jordan, and I certainly do agree with Smotrich on this. It terrifies me that I think he's right and that he's identified this, because who knows how this could escalate, but it is very concerning here. So the finance minister claimed there is no doubt that in the long term, encouraging immigration is the only solution that will bring peace and security to the residents of Israel, and also, as he says, ease the suffering of the Arab residents of Gaza, which, just always makes me so sick when the Israelis pretend that they are carrying out a genocide for the benefit of the Palestinian people. Of course, it's going to help them too, not to have to live under Hamas and not to have to live right next to the Israelis. It's good for them to have their homes destroyed and to be displaced with absolutely nothing to a foreign country that they are not from and are not a part of. So says Smotrich and Mar Ben-Gvir and other members of the Israeli government. All right, next up here, Senate Democrats blocked bill to sanction the ICC for targeting Israeli officials. So on Tuesday, Senate Democrats blocked a bill that would sanction the ICC over its arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for their role in the genocidal war in Gaza. The bill, which had already been passed through the House, needed 60 votes to advance through the Republican-controlled Senate, but it failed in a vote of 54 to 45. Every Republican voted in favor, but the bill only received support from one Democrat senator, John Fetterman, who has been extremely supportive of Israel's campaign in Gaza. So Fetterman wrote on X, deeply disappointed by the outcome of the ICC sanction bill. My vote follows Israel, not the ICC that wreaked havoc, not the ICC that equivocated the democratically elected leader of our special ally to the terrorists and rapists of Hamas. The ICC also issued an arrest warrant for Mohammed Daif, the head of Hamas's military wing. The court sought warrants against two other Hamas leaders, Sinwar and Haniyeh, but they were both killed by Israel before the warrants were actually issued. Congress is still expected to pass some sort of legislation to sanction the ICC, since Democratic leadership wants to punish the court for investigating Israeli war crimes, but thought the bill brought to the floor on Tuesday was too broad and could lead to sanctions against U.S. allies that are ICC member states. And so Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, the ICC bill is one I largely support and would like to see become law. However, as much as I oppose the ICC bias against Israel, as much as I want to see the institution drastically reformed and reshaped, the bill before us is poorly drafted and is deeply problematic. And so, again, the problem isn't that the Israelis are committing war crimes. We still have to defend Israel no matter what. They just want a better war to bill about it. So Netanyahu is coming to the United States. Netanyahu to meet with Trump this week at the White House. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet Trump at the White House next week, marking his first foreign leader invited to Washington by the new Trump administration. Trump told reporters on Monday that he would be hosting Netanyahu very soon, and the office of the Israeli Prime Minister confirmed that on Tuesday the meeting would take place on February 4th. Ahead of Netanyahu's trip to the U.S., Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to hold talks with the Israeli leader in Israel. According to the Jerusalem Post, they are expected to discuss Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire deal with Hamas. Netanyahu claimed that he received a guarantee from Trump that Israel could restart its genocidal war in Gaza if it chooses to do so, and Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich has also said he received assurances from Netanyahu that Israeli military operations would restart after the first phase, which involves a 42-day ceasefire to allow for a hostage exchange. Witkoff, a former real estate investor from New York, has said that he wants to ensure this full ceasefire deal is implemented, but warned it will be difficult. Pressure Witkoff put on Netanyahu was seen as the key factor in getting Israel to agree to the deal in the first place. Israeli officials have said that they received assurances from the U.S. in exchange for signing the ceasefire deal, including a promise to increase U.S. military aid. Over the weekend, President Trump released a 2,000-pound bomb shipment for Israel that was paused by President Biden, and that was a PR move because Israel already had all the bombs it needed. Now that ceasefire is in jeopardy because of Israel shutting down UNRWA. So this article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute, UNRWA shutdown risks killing Gaza ceasefire. So the head of the UN Palestinian Aid Agency, that's UNRWA, said Tel Aviv's decision to halt his agency's assistance program in Israel jeopardizes the Gaza truce and hostage deal. So on Tuesday, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations said UNRWA would have to cease its operations in Israel when Tel Aviv's law banning the organization goes into effect on Thursday. Ambassador Danny Danon told the UN Security Council UNRWA must cease operations and evacuate all premises it operates in Jerusalem. Israel will terminate all collaboration, communication, and contact with UNRWA or anyone acting on its behalf. UNRWA chief Felipe Lanzare responded by saying the shuttering of UNRWA in Israel risks causing the Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal to end. So Lanzare told the UNSC, in 2 days, our operations in the occupied Palestinian territory will be crippled as legislation passed by the Israeli Knesset takes effect. At stake is the fate of millions of Palestinians, the ceasefire, and the prospects for a political solution that brings lasting peace and security. UNRWA serves as the most crucial aid agency for Palestinians who live as refugees or second-class citizens in Israeli-occupied territory. Since the start of the Israeli onslaught in Gaza, UNRWA has provided a crucial lifeline to people living in deplorable conditions caused by the Israeli siege of the Strip. Following the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, then Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared a complete siege, including food, water, and medicine to Gaza. UNRWA has been a key facilitator of bringing aid through the Israeli checkpoints to the people of Gaza. Tel Aviv has attempted to portray UNRWA as another wing of Hamas, claiming its members helped to conduct the October 7th attack. However, an independent inquiry found that Israel could not provide evidence to back up that claim. Lanzare told the Security Council that Israel recently ramped up its global propaganda campaign against the agency. He said, the government of Israel is investing significant resources to portray the agency as a terrorist organization and our staff as terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. Billboard and ads accusing UNRWA of terrorism recently appeared in major cities around the world. They are paid for by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The UNRWA chief went on to say that Tel Aviv is weaponizing Google ads as a part of the narrative warfare. Google ad campaigns redirect those seeking information about the agency to websites replete with disinformation. Lanzari argued that the anti-UNRWA propaganda has already had deadly effects, as 273 of his organization's staff has been killed during the Israeli destruction of Gaza, which is a record number of Israeli staff killed. All right, next up here, this one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Former Israeli defense minister says more troops should be sent to Lebanon to enforce the ceasefire. So Israeli troops continue to enforce the demand that civilians don't attempt to return to their homes being occupied by the Israeli military on Monday after the 60-day ceasefire that was in place expired and Israel decided to remain. 2 more civilians were reportedly killed by Israeli gunfire on Monday. The initial ceasefire is past its 60-day deadline, but Israel and the U.S. have extended it until February 18th, giving Israel an additional 22 days to occupy southern Lebanon before the new deadline hits. Lebanon's government said they accept that extension. Hezbollah officials have complained about the unlimited U.S. support for Israeli military action, but so far have shown no signs of attacking Israeli troops occupying the south. Israel's own position is nebulous in that they keep insisting they need to say, blaming Iran and providing no indication when or even if they intend to withdraw. The former Israeli defense minister and military chief Benny Gantz is calling for a further escalation of that ceasefire option and occupation. Gantz said that Israel should stop talking about the withdrawal from Lebanon and simply expand both ground and air operations in the country. He said this would be done to enforce the ceasefire on Lebanon, but would also presumably involve a lot more Israeli firing. Israel has reiterated its demands that civilians not return home to those southern villages and has killed at least 24 Lebanese in the last 2 days to ensure they don't get home. UNIFIL, which is the UN peacekeeping mission in southern Lebanon, has also cautioned Lebanese against trying to return to their homes, noting it isn't safe. Israel has committed hundreds, if not over 1,000 violations of the Lebanon ceasefire since it initially went into effect in late November. This has included shooting at displaced civilians, shooting at the media, burning and demolishing homes and infrastructure in occupied villages and towns. The handful of villages Israel has withdrawn from only saw troops leave after the entire village was effectively destroyed. So no real indication that Israel is getting out of southern Lebanon anytime soon. All right, last story here today. Report: Trump plans to withdraw thousands of troops from Syria. So President Trump is planning to withdraw thousands of U.S. troops from Syria. Turkey's Anadolu agency reported on Tuesday, citing the Israeli broadcaster Khan. The Khan report said senior White House officials conveyed the message to their Israeli counterparts, indicating that Trump intends to pull thousands of U.S. troops out of Syria. The report adds that the U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria would raise significant concerns in Tel Aviv. Before Trump was inaugurated, the Pentagon under the Biden administration admitted the U.S. had been lying about the number of troops it had in Syria. For years, the Pentagon said there were only 900 U.S. troops occupying Syria, but it was revealed in December that there are 2,000 troops now stationed there. During his first term in office, Trump said he would withdraw from Syria, but ended up reversing his decision after coming under immense pressure from Congress and his administration. In 2019, Trump agreed to keep only several hundred U.S. troops in Syria to secure the oil field, but his envoy at the time, James Jeffrey, later admitted that he was lying about the real number of U.S. troops in the country to deceive Trump. and to, make sure the U.S. occupation of Syria continued. So we will see if Trump is any more effective at governing this time around, if he could get his administration in line and make sure they do what he wants and withdraw the U.S. troops from Syria. This would obviously be something to celebrate, but until we know more about the plan, I'll just remain cautiously optimistic. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning into the show. I will be back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show this afternoon into evening, and then we will have another episode of Conflicts of Interest out Friday. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back with more episodes soon.